Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. You know, one of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
I've got a lot of grandbabies, like a lot. And when it comes to finding a gift for each of them, you know, it could add up. But this year, while I was making my way through Walmart, I realized I don't have to spend a lot to get the gifts they'll love.
An OPI mini mani set. I'm gonna do so much nail art. Oh, yeah! A Lego set. My own Walla water bottle.
Ooh, and that's just half of them.
Shop great gifts they're sure to love for $25 and under at Walmart.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Lance Canfield. Lance is a mechanical engineer and former professional mountain bike racer who drew his first mountain bike design in 1996. Today, his bike brand Canfield Bikes sells mountain bikes and components designed and tested in Poncha Springs, Colorado. Thanks for joining me, Lance.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you first started racing downhill bikes in 1994. What were the bikes like back then?
A lot of the bikes were built kind of like a road bike, using road bike tubing. Like they were
Really?
incredibly underbuilt. They were quite bad. Full suspension was fairly new. And so the kinematics were also very bad. You always had some kind of a sacrifice somewhere within the bike, whether it was braking, bump performance, durability was certainly a huge part. Yeah, lots and lots of broken bikes in the early days of my riding. I had a GT LTS at the time. Okay. And I broke that thing 3 times.
You broke it 3 times. So what, did you repair it like yourself or did you take it?
No, I warrantied it.
Okay.
Just a random consumer and, you know, riding it probably way beyond what the thing was capable of. And so it was considered a downhill bike at a whopping 3 inches of travel. Yeah, 80 mils of travel, front and rear. It was amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what was the competition like then? Because, I mean, I assume everybody was riding similar bikes, right? So were the courses as rough? Like, were people going as fast? Like, what was the competition like on bikes like that?
Riding certainly wasn't as fast, but the competition was mostly on similar bikes. And then you had a few randoms that were on, you know, team bikes. You were on Team Cannondale. Missy Giove shows up with a Fulcrum bike, and it was just like, oh my gosh, what is that? You know?
Yeah. Were the bikes like a big differentiator then? Like if somebody was on, you know, whatever the latest, newest one was that like a big advantage?
Those bikes started to come out probably 97 or 98 is when bikes started to jump from 3 inches, 4 inches up to all of a sudden it was 8 inches. And so there was a radical change in the market in the late 90s when that happened. And construction changed drastically. All of a sudden you saw Super 8s out there. And those things were like, oh, it's like a motorcycle. This is amazing. Right. You know, and Brooklyn Machine Works was way ahead of their time. They were building Burley bikes early.
Yeah.
And those were really cool. And they still are. Like, that's a collector's item for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Well, so when that shift happened, you know, when people started going from like a 3-inch travel bike all the way up to an 8-inch travel bike, did you and other athletes have to like adjust how you rode, or was that like a pretty natural progression? Like as the bikes got better, were you able to adapt pretty easily?
Yeah, I mean, it made riding a lot easier, obviously. The downhill racetracks prior to that were a lot of fire roads, and they were not really like a downhill track, like by today's standards.
Yeah.
Right. But once those bikes were a lot more travel, all of a sudden the promoters were building tracks that were like borderline rideable for a lot of riders. People would complain usually at most every race, like, oh, this part's too hard. Like, if they're like, I was in sport class when I started, and I really wasn't a very fast rider. That was my goal, was to become a fast rider.
Right.
And so I had to work really hard at it and focus and learn how to race, like mentally, to become a fast rider.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I realized my equipment was the biggest limiting factor at that point.
Yeah.
And that's when I started designing a bike.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so you had a background, or you studied mechanical engineering, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were a student, were you thinking that you were going to do something with bikes, or did you have like kind of a different vision of what your career would look like with that degree?
I wasn't thinking about designing bikes at that point in my life. I was riding hardtails and what's considered freeride today, like doing a lot of urban stuff, just jumping my bike downstairs, off roofs, and
off roofs. Wow.
Yeah. Just doing dumb stuff that kids do. I don't know of many kids that were jumping off roofs at that time, but I was going up in the hills above my house and riding down the steep scree fields and just doing kind of, I thought was super fun stuff. I ruptured a disc in my back doing a jump. It was meant to be a step-up jump onto a dirt road flat spot. I overshot the whole road and landed up into the hillside above there and completely stopped. It was probably a 40-foot step up, and ruptured the disc in my back, had to move back to my mom's house. And she said, well, if you're going to live at my house, you're going to do something. So I was like, all right, great. So I went to the local college that I had already had a degree at for auto body repair. And so my previous jobs and life were revolving around hot rods and doing custom paint, custom stuff. And so that was a very toxic job and a lot of work. And I was actually quite excited about going back to school so that I could do something that didn't wear me out during the day, so that I could ride at night and take my free time and be able to ride.
Yeah. So
mechanical engineering was my choice, and I was excited about it. I really liked it. I thought it was fun. So yeah, at that point I was able to get back to riding a little bit. I had back surgery. Rehab lasted about a year, and the self-paced course at the college was awesome because I could rip through stuff because I kind of had a natural intuition about a lot of things that were related to mechanical engineering. That was kind of my strong suit. Clept my calculus and my trigonometry courses in basically 1 week. I studied for 4 days, took both of those tests on Friday, and I was done. It was like, bam. I was like, moving on.
Cool.
So that was cool.
So getting back to those 90s bikes and some of the first bikes that you designed, I read that your first bike in 99, I think, the big fatty fat.
The big fatty fat. Yep. Named after our mean little dog.
Okay. Might have missed one of the fats there, but I read that the bike had 12 inches of travel front and rear. I mean, that's massive. How did that work?
It worked great. It rides really well. It's a couple millimeters off of being a DW link. Honestly, it's incredibly close. Yeah. As the first attempt at actually building a bike, it was the most complicated thing you could ever imagine. A multi-link bike with a pulley wheel, with 12 inches of travel. That should be incredibly hard, even by today's standards. But it rode really well. I had a bunch of criteria that I wanted to hit, like 17-inch chain stays. I wanted the bottom bracket as low as I could possibly make it without being excessively low, which was still a really high bottom bracket. A certain wheelbase, because I was doing more stunting. And so I wanted a short wheelbase. And so I had all of this criteria, and the top tube ended up being the one thing that got sacrificed in the process. So it ended up being kind of a small bike, really small bike. But for me at the time, it didn't really matter because I was an avid BMXer, skate park, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Little tiny bikes were fun. They whipped around easy. So that was good for the time. But to be able to fit 12 inches of travel, I used a pulley wheel and a rearward wheel path. You know, that's what a lot of brands are doing these days. It's become cool now.
Yeah.
Finally.
Only 25 years later.
Yeah, it took a while. I'm surprised that people were so resistant for so long.
Yeah.
But it was the original mullet. It's a 24 rear, 26 front.
Okay.
And so the smaller rear wheel helped make 12 inches fit. You know, the rear wheel path kept it from ramming into my seat. So those were the two key things that allowed me to make a 12-inch bike and have it work right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not super familiar with downhill bikes, but the bikes today, nobody has 12 inches of travel, right? Like the bikes have kind of settled around like 10 inches at the max?
8 inches. 8 inches is normal.
Yeah. What's changed? Is it like the shocks are better or different or able to manage that stuff better? Or is it just people found they didn't need 12 inches, that was just too much travel?
It's mostly geometry.
Okay.
So your bottom bracket height ends up so high that the bike doesn't feel like you're down in it. You're way up on top of it. It's way too tall feeling. So that's why they back down to about 8 inches. As wheels got bigger, arguably 8 inches is even too much. You know,
okay. Interesting.
You're seeing 7-inch bikes, very capable.
Yeah.
You know,
interesting.
190 is even, you know, some manufacturers are making 190 bikes that are downhill bikes. But 8 inches is kind of what everybody settled on because it was a low enough bottom bracket to feel like you're in the bike, and the geometry was a lot closer. 12 inches is too hard to bunny hop. And when you hit jumps and berms, you've got a lot of travel to push down into before the bike firms up to be able to support you correctly coming around the corner or off the lip of a jump. So it required a lot more body English to handle a bike with that much travel. 8 inches is way easier to handle.
Gotcha. Yeah. And you mentioned that this was like a really complex design. It has a lot going on with it. What did you use to design it back then? I mean, nowadays, I'm sure there's like software that can make this kind of thing a lot easier. What were you doing to design bikes back then?
I did a lot of research. You know, motorcycles were about the closest thing that you could find information on. And I read everything that I could about motorcycle suspension design, but it didn't really relate to a multi-link bike. And the reason why I chose a multi-link bike is because you can get really good pedaling, really good bump performance, really good braking. Usually pedaling and braking, those two things fight each other.
Okay.
So you can have good pedaling, but really crappy braking on a single pivot, or vice versa.
Yeah. And motorcycles, you don't have to worry about the pedaling part, right? This is what I've heard from lots of other bike designers is that, I mean, you can't just copy paste from a motorcycle. There's a lot more to it, right?
Yeah. I mean, you still have to pedal as a downhill racer. Pedaling is a big deal. Like, we'll talk about that later, but I focused on motorcycles for a bit, realized that wasn't really relevant to what I wanted to do. And I felt like Formula One race cars and Baja trucks, those two were using multi-link suspension. So A-arm suspension is sideways, but if you turn it backwards, it's basically a short link, multi-link type of system. And Baja trucks, the rear suspension on those, a trailing link rear suspension, that's pretty much the pinnacle of suspension and control on rough terrain. And so I focused on those types of systems and crawl underneath off-road race trucks and eyeball what they were doing and try to figure out how they were doing it. And so at a certain point, I just started putting stuff down on paper and using like, okay, at sag, I need my links to be fairly level, flat, you know, so that I have 90 degrees. When the bump hits it, it's at 90 degrees. It has the most leverage to push that linkage upward, right?
Okay.
So it was guesswork, 100% guesswork at that point.
Wow. So you had a lot of prototypes, I guess, that you were working with, like full blown on a bike, or were you just like kind of playing with little desk models and stuff like that to figure it out?
There was no prototypes. This was all designed in AutoCAD.
Okay. That's still around. I guess that's still what people use. It's probably just works a lot better now than it used to.
Well, yeah, SolidWorks is what I use now.
Okay.
Because it's a 3D modeling program, and you can see every clearance, interference. You can make things move. It's far more intuitive. It's a way better program. AutoCAD was like, imagine board drafting. Like you have a front view and a side view and a top view. It was literally that. Right. It was very archaic, and it was really incredibly difficult to make any kind of changes to or evaluate anything. And you couldn't make anything move, right? It wasn't 3D. Yeah. So by today's standards, I would never go back to AutoCAD. I absolutely hate that program.
Yeah. Sorry to the AutoCAD people out there.
Yeah. I'm sure it's much better today, but
yeah, can't believe they haven't updated that and put more into it. But yes, SolidWorks seems to be what everybody's using today for bike stuff. One of the things that I'm really excited to talk to you about is you actually competed on some of your own bikes in Red Bull Rampage, actually at the first 4 Red Bull Rampage competitions.
Yeah.
What was it like back then? How did you even get involved? Like, what was the first, the call up like where they were like, hey, we got this thing. Do you want to do it?
Well, I guess leading up to that, I was riding with Chris Bauman, Crispy, and he was friends with Bender. And so I get a call from Crispy, and he's like, I got this buddy Bender who I had seen in the Down movie. And I was like, that dude's crazy. It was awesome. Like, I'll go ride with him.
Yeah.
So I got an invite to go down to his house and do some free riding for Double Down, the second movie. And I was like, yeah, I definitely want to do that. That sounds like right up my alley. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So I go down there, and this was in Virgin, Utah. And this was at a point where Bender was living in a little shed behind this guy's double wide and just riding his bike and jumping off cliffs all day and scoping out all sorts of crazy stuff.
Oh, wow.
He takes us out to this zone, and he's got a 40-foot drop lined up. So we do a bunch of filming, and we were able to ride these, red rock cliffs and jump off stuff. And it was a great day. We had a ton of fun and got a bunch of great footage. And then at the end of the day, Josh climbs up on this butte and jumps off a 40-foot cliff. He did it twice. And ragdolled a bunch. And it was the biggest thing that I had ever seen in my life. It was the biggest thing at the time that anybody had ever done.
Yeah. Wow.
So I was blown away. And so Josh had been talking with Todd Barber, who's the promoter of Red Bull Rampage.
Okay.
They were trying to come up with an idea for biking for this event that was similar to like a free skiing competition where people could just start up on the mountain and go wherever they want and come down. And so the zone where Josh had been riding, it's all BLM, and it's open riding BLM. So you don't have to stay on a trail. You can kind of ride wherever you want. It's a legal place to do that kind of thing. And so they decided to do the event there. Some of the stipulations, though, with the BLM was that you couldn't build, you couldn't dig out there.
Okay.
And so there was no pre-made jump lines. Like now today, they've got like the lower section of the course is all pre-built, kind of with big machines. And then up high, you have the opportunity to kind of build your own line and be creative.
Right.
Then it was all just raw. There was literally no trails.
Wow.
It was just powder everywhere.
Wow.
So the first year was a lot of camaraderie. It was amazing because everybody was just trying to see if they could ride down the mountain. They weren't really being super competitive that first year. We were all stoked, like watching Wade jump off a thing or Richie jump off a thing. And it was like, that was so sick, and we were mostly riding the exact same ridge line. The entire group was pretty much riding the same lines. The second year, the Canadians had come down in the summer and done a little bit of filming down there, and they had started building other stuff in nearby. And so the second year, all of a sudden we saw the Canadians doing the Canadian bacon line and doing some faster jumps and bigger gaps. And And that really stepped it up for all the rest of us. For 2003, the third year, all of a sudden it was competitive at that point.
Hey, it's Emma Chamberlain. I designed these new glasses for Warby Parker, and I basically can't take them off. Like, I'm showering in them and sleeping in them. They're just that good. Go see them all at warbyparker.com. And you know what? Have a good day too. Okay? All right? Bye.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
And people were trying to throw tricks. Cedric Gracia learned how to backflip that year. And he threw a backflip for the first time in a competition that year. That was pretty cool. He mostly pulled it off. He kind of landed and put his knee in the ground and popped up and rode out. But he took first in qualifying that year. And I was able to qualify second behind him.
Wow. Yeah.
I tended to not do much tricking. I wasn't really a trick guy. I was more of a go big. Like I was known for the guy that went big. I just would find the biggest stuff on the mountain that as an engineer, like geometry works really well in my brain. So I would find the biggest thing I could find with a good landing and do that.
Yeah. Biggest as in like the most vertical drop, or like what was big to you? Yeah. Okay.
The biggest drop, and if the landing was way out there, then I would go off the cliff fast and go way out there. The first year, everyone was just jumping off. The biggest move was probably a 10-foot cliff. Really wasn't that big by today's standards, but it was everybody would come off of it kind of slow, and it was just a bomb hole where everyone landed. But out there about 15 feet, it rolled down again.
Okay.
And so I got the bright idea to hit it super fast and gap out. And I was the first one to jump like kind of fast off of the big cliff. So people were cheering after that one.
Yeah. Were there big crowds by that point? Like by the third or fourth year?
The third and fourth year. Yeah, there was. Yeah. The first couple years, it was pretty much just friends and family and a handful of locals that would come out, and they heard about this crazy thing. It was like, they're going to ride bikes out there? I'm going to watch that. Yeah, it's going to be carnage.
Yeah.
But yeah, by the third year, it started to get pretty crowded on the mountain, and they didn't really have spectator zones at that point.
Okay.
So people were underneath the cliffs. They were in the landings, like photographers that didn't know where the person was going to ride to were literally in the line.
Wow.
It's like, get off my line. But they had to stop the competition in 2003, and they're yelling up like on the loudspeaker onto the mountain, like, get off the mountain, like get out from underneath the cliffs, like calling people out by name, like you have to move.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, 2004, they had flagged out zones for riders or for spectators to watch. So that's where all of that came from. It was a trial and error process for all the spectator zones.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you were doing a lot of this kind of free ride jumping kind of stuff on your own, like well before competing in Rampage. Would you though, like for the competition, would you get nervous? Like, were you trying to do bigger stuff than you had done before? Or was it more just like, this is my thing that I do and I'm just going to do it like in front of people?
I felt relatively confident in my abilities to be able to ride this stuff, but it was bigger than anything else I had been riding. You know, jumping off roofs was about as close as it got to the size, but all of a sudden in 2004, like I jumped off a 40-foot cliff 5 times during the weekend.
Wow.
The Super T drop, like Super T showed me that one in competition in 2003. And I was like, that's a big drop. Now I'm going to do that one for next year.
Wow.
So I planned for that one. And yeah, it was definitely a lot bigger than what I had been doing. I was certainly nervous. I think everyone there is nervous. Like whenever you go to a rampage, you can feel the energy in the canyon. You know the riders are nervous when they're dropping in. We're not all the superheroes that we're seeing up there throwing backflips off 40-foot cliffs. Like it was nerve-wracking. And I've told people a few times that, it was a lot like going to war. You had a good 50-50 chance of coming back home broken.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Those aren't good odds, but that was my track record. I came home broken 2 out of 4 years.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Clearly everybody there is riding at the limit. And I mean, that's what makes it a spectacle and makes people want to watch it every year. At the time that you were riding, were you just riding essentially what was a downhill bike, or were you building sort of like more dedicated free ride bikes? Because I know that used to be a thing. Free ride bikes were different from downhill bikes. So what were the bikes that you were using to compete on at that time?
I always competed on bikes that I designed. So the first year I was on it was our second generation. It was like after the big fat fatty fat, we decided 12 was too much. So we knocked it down to 10 inches of travel.
Okay.
We called it the fatty fat. a little smaller.
Slightly less fat. Yeah.
Yeah. Slightly less fat. But it was a lot of travel. It was a big bike and it worked really well for free ride. But honestly, designing those bikes, every one of them was designed to be a race bike.
Okay.
An advantage on a racetrack. That's what I was trying for.
Downhill racing, right?
Yes, downhill racing. I never built a bike truly specific for free ride until about 2008. And I built the Lucky. That was an 8-inch travel, traditional wheel path, not a pulley wheel bike.
Okay.
They're easier to pop a wheelie on, to get the front end up. A pulley wheel bike is really difficult to get the front end up on. So coming off of a cliff at slow speeds, some of my worst wrecks at Rampage were that, trying to get off of a cliff and the front end just drops away from you and you crash on your head.
Yeah. Wow.
So traditional wheel path, easier to pop a wheelie, easier to compress and pop off the lip, jump off the lip, more nimble, better in corners, more agile. But it didn't save you the same way that a pulley wheel bike will. Like if you case a jump on a pulley wheel bike, the wheel just gets out of the way and you just continue forward and you almost don't even know that you cased it. Like I hit the bender sender, which is about 30 feet down and 70 feet out. I'm sure you've seen footage of that one, but the first time I hit it, I knuckled the landing, knuckled the top of the lip, and I didn't even know that I cased it because I was on a pulley wheel bike.
Yeah. Wow.
I didn't even know until I saw the footage and I was like, oh, I cased that. Like that could have been really bad on a normal bike.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, yeah. I mean, are there, I'm not sure, are there like dedicated free ride bikes anymore, or have the downhill bikes kind of moved more in that direction where you can pop on them and be a little bit more playful?
I don't think that there's a whole lot in the dedicated free ride bike kind of realm these days. Cam Zink's bike, his new company, that thing looks like it's probably a pretty proper free ride bike.
Okay.
It's got small wheels.
Yeah.
29ers aren't the best for a free ride bike. They're big. They're unwieldy. They don't spin and flip and do all the little tricks and stuff as well as a small wheeled bike. In my opinion, a 27.5 is still probably the most relevant in free ride because it's small enough to be whippable and jumpable, but it's big enough that it can still roll over some things if you make mistakes.
Yeah. Okay.
26 was a little small. It would hang up on things pretty badly.
Right. Interesting. So Canfield Bikes use a patented suspension design known as Canfield Balance Formula, or CBF for short, that you designed along with your brother Chris. So what makes the design different from others on the market?
Trying to keep it somewhat simple, I guess. The center of curvature, it stays positioned directly on top of the chainring.
Okay.
Never moving from there.
Okay.
Which is true center of the suspension. That is good because the wheel path and the tension segment of the chain rotate around the exact same spot. It allows the wheel to move freely independently of the chain tension.
Okay.
Even if you're pedaling, if you're hitting bumps, if you're braking, the wheel is always free to move, conform to the terrain freely,
Okay.
without the tension that a lot of companies design into their bikes. The chain tension causes the bike to have a little bit more anti-squat,
Right.
a firmness to the pedaling. It creates a bit of a platform, so to speak, which feels great in a parking lot and on smooth terrain. But as soon as you're hitting bumps, it causes the bike to feel nervous. I'm sure that you've probably ridden a bike that feels nervous going downhill, but feels very sprightly climbing up the hill.
Yeah. Right.
And that's kind of the trade-off that all other companies do. The CBF patent allows the center of curvature to be very tightly focused directly on top of the chain ring so that it never, ever moves away throughout all of the travel. So no matter where you are in travel, it's always going to pedal exactly the same, focusing all of that pedaling energy directly into the chain ring and propelling you forward, not moving your suspension up and down. None of that. So
getting back to that idea of like the chain tension that a lot of other designs experience, for some people, what they're doing is they're using like an O-chain device, right? Are we talking about the same thing where
yes,
you can try to mitigate that, but the CBF, it does that by default, right? Like you don't need to worry about running an O-chain or like having a hub that's going to be like, higher engagement or any of that stuff, right?
Right. Yes, that's exactly it. The O-chain is, I guess, a Band-Aid for bikes that have pedal kick. As you compress the bike, the cranks will rotate counterclockwise,
right,
and they'll knock your feet. And so it's translating that bump force into your feet and causing the bike to feel nervous and you to like maybe hit your brakes because you're like, I'm getting out of control. Right.
What just happened? Yeah.
Where a CBF suspension doesn't do that. It just openly, freely contours to the ground, and it makes you feel like you have more travel than you really do on shorter travel bikes, especially, but it gives you a lot of confidence on longer travel bikes. And
Yeah. I mean, is CBF better suited for certain types of riding or travel ranges? I mean, looking at the Canfield lineup, I think is the shortest travel bike that you have it on is that the Tilt with like 130? Is it 130 rear or 140?
138. Yep.
138. Right. So I mean, does it suit these longer travel bikes better, or is there like a short travel application as well?
CBF works on any travel bike, anything from long to short. Long travel bikes are the hardest ones to design that will pedal well. That's always been the hardest design wise to do.
Yeah.
And as you go shorter in travel, it becomes much easier to design. So CBF has been flushed out in the long travel modes to get it to where it's at. And then the trickle down is that with shorter travel bikes, you feel like you have a little bit more travel than you really do on those shorter bikes. So
why is that you feel that?
It's because the suspension is open to move freely without regard to the pedaling or the braking.
Okay.
So it feels like you have more travel. If your chain tension, like if it gets tight as your wheel goes through the travel, that's going to kick your pedals and that's going to make you feel like you're running through your travel quicker than you really are. Where ours is just open and smooth, it relies on the progression rate to resist bottom out, right? And progression rate to create support at the sag point. It doesn't require the chain tension to help create support for the rider.
Okay. Yeah. And in addition to Canfield, there's other bikes that use CBF suspension. I have not tested it on one of your bikes, but I have ridden a bike with CBF from Revel, the Rascal. And I mean, it feels great. It was one of my favorite bikes that I tested this year. And I'm wondering, does it work well for more like recreational riders like myself, or is there also an advantage for racers? Like how would you kind of subjectively describe sort of like the ride feel and the performance of CBF? Is it designed more for like feeling good, or is it designed more for going fast and winning races?
Well, it does both. So it does work really, really well for anyone from a beginner all the way to a pro level rider because of the confidence that it inspires, the smoothness and the control that it creates. One of my design goals, every bike that we build, is to have the bike feel very intuitive. Jump on the bike. It doesn't feel like you need to do anything radical to set it up. It just works really well. Why does it?
Yeah.
It brakes smoothly. It pedals efficiently. It, resists bottom out the right amount. It supports you so you don't feel like you're sagging too much or too little. If you get on a bike and you're immediately comfortable with the bike, that creates a lot of confidence.
Yeah. It feels like you're cheating though. That's exactly how I would describe my experiences. It's intuitive. I didn't feel like I had to know how to tune the suspension and set everything up. I mean, like you said, you get on it and it feels right. But that makes me wonder if I was a pro, would I be like, this is like dumbing it down, or like this, bikes that have like a racy suspension design, a lot of those, they don't feel fun to ride, right? I mean, they're like all business, and there's definitely like a different ride feel to it. So yeah, how do you get like both of those characteristics out of a single design?
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Hey, it's Austin James. If you're like me, trying to live your best life while living with diabetes, you can relate to worrying if you're doing a good job managing your diabetes. I use the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor to get real-time glucose readings and see the impact of every meal and activity to make better decisions. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor can help me live life with diabetes on my own terms, and it gives me more time for the things I love, like being a dad and a musician. Now this is progress. Learn more at freestylelibre.us.
For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
Well, you talk about a pro-level racer and dumbing it down. Well, that's just an advantage on the racetrack. That's what it's giving you. It's giving you confidence on the racetrack. It's giving you a smooth suspension travel feel that gives you more traction in the corners, under braking, everywhere. Like, it gives you more confidence. And why would you not do that?
Right.
I mean, if you have a certain way that you like to set your bike up, you can still do those things. Like, a lot of really fast riders run their suspension really stiff.
Right.
And CBF allows you to still do that, and it still pedals exactly the same. You can have your bike run too much sag, and it'll still pedal great. You can have very little sag. It'll still pedal great. It stays perfectly focused on that top of the chainring position all the time, no matter where you are in travel. So it allows you to tweak the characteristics of the bike performance to the way that you like to ride, but it doesn't force you to do one certain thing. You don't have to set up your sag exactly at 30%. You can have more, you can have less, you can do whatever you want to do with setup, and it'll still ride incredibly well and very intuitively.
Yeah. Best of both worlds, I guess. And again, like, I can vouch for that description of it, where it doesn't seem to hinge so much on all those variables, at least getting that ride feel that people want. And also, I guess what you're saying too is that, like, if it feels good, it's going to make you a faster rider. It's going to, perform better, because what you're feeling is what's actually happening.
Exactly. Yeah. Racing is mostly mental. It's not, well, at least downhill racing is mostly mental in my mind. It's knowing the track well enough to be able to go 100% all the way down the track because you know every single rock on the track, every route, you know where everything is and exactly where to go and where to put your tires and the pressure that you need to put on the tires so that you get grip but don't slide out. You know, and all of those things are mental. Knowing the track, knowing your bike is set up correctly, knowing that every little detail has been accounted for before you hit the track. And physical attributes certainly play a part, being able to pedal hard in the right spots, but knowing where you have to pedal hard is more important than being able to actually pedal hard. Yeah, right. I guess, when you feel good, you ride good. And those are words to live by. So Canfield has been a proponent of shorter cranks and crank arms specifically for a while now. Why is that? Like, how did you first kind of come to that realization? Well, in the beginning, you know, my brother came off the racetrack and he had pedal striked and sent himself over the bars, and he was so mad. He was just like, I hate this. It sucks. Like, I hit my pedals and then I fly over the bars. I was doing so well. You know, it's frustrating when you have these mistakes on the track. And it was like, we can design something that's going to help with that. You know, that's where our crampon ultimate pedals came from. Oh, okay. So you started with the pedals, do a thinner pedal. Okay. Yeah. A thin pedal allowed us to not snag the pedal on stuff as well. And it gave you a lot more balance. Like, you're closer to the spindle height. And you probably have seen the new set of pedals that came out that have like a hang down to them. It puts your body weight below the spindle center, which creates a lot of stability. And that's the goal with those super thin pedals, is to get more stability out of the pedals. But pedal strikes become less and less the thinner the pedals are. Our pedals have a 6 millimeter thick leading edge. Okay. So nearly impossible to snag on anything. Yeah. Well, but what are we talking, like, how much additional clearance did that give you over like the normal pedals or the pedals that you guys were running before that? It's a few millimeters. Like, the old ones were like 17 to 19 millimeters thick. Okay. And ours were 11. Okay. Which is the thinnest that you can make with a full length spindle and solid construction, like downhill worthy construction on a pedal. Yeah. So we're talking like on either side, then you're talking like maybe 3 millimeters, but I guess, I mean, that probably makes a huge difference when you're riding at the limit like that. It makes a huge difference. Millimeters make all the difference in the world when you're talking about a bike. And that's a lot of the design changes that have increased the comfort level and the safety level of bikes in the last 10 years come from like 3 to 6 millimeters kind of differences. Yeah. Cranks were another addition to that. They provided a lot more clearance, like 5 millimeters per size shorter, right? Right. So if 165s is all you can get, all of a sudden a 160 makes a huge difference. I run 155s on my downhill bike, and like at 6 feet tall, that's pretty ideal for me. Wow. I could easily run 150s. Yeah, it's short, but for a downhill bike, it's amazing. And the crank length is one of the things that dictates your rollout gear. Like, how much one rotation on the cranks is how far you go on the pavement, right? Yeah. So front chainring, rear chainring, the crank length, and the wheel size. Your crank length dictates that as well. Okay. So if you go 10 millimeters shorter on your crank length, you can go 2 teeth smaller on your front chainring. Okay. Gotcha. So more clearance on your chainring, more clearance on your cranks, and you still have the exact same rollout. So what size chainring are you running on your downhill bike then? I still run a 34. Okay. I still run a pretty tall gear because I still like to go really fast. And trails are getting more buffed out and faster. So it's still a reasonable gear, 34, but we used to run, 36, 38s. Yeah. Well, so you are thinking about the rollout, sort of that initial pedaling with the shorter cranks. What about, because you were also saying
during the race, like pedaling can make a huge difference, like, flatter sections or transition sections. So
yes.
Are there any disadvantages then to those shorter cranks, or is it all kind of just taken care of as long as you've got the right gearing?
The one disadvantage that you could argue is that a longer crank gives you more leverage.
Mm-hmm.
So if you come to a complete stop in a corner or close to a complete stop and you need to just stomp those pedals and get going again as fast as possible, that's where a longer crank is going to help you. Imagine a start of a BMX race, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you need to win the race straight out of the gate, then a longer crank may help you.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere else, the shorter crank, in my opinion, is far better. It allows you to pedal through rocky spots where other people are not able to because their feet are going to be smacking rocks.
Mm-hmm.
It's way safer to be able to not snag your pedals and fly over the bars and land on your head.
Right.
So it keeps your heart rate lower by being able to spin a smaller circle.
Okay.
You can imagine taking like really big steps up, like a boot pack to climb up to the top of a ski run or something in the backcountry, right?
Mm-hmm.
You never find a boot pack that has big, wide space steps. That they're always little tiny steps, right?
Right. Yeah.
Keeps your heart rate low, and it's just easier. It's easier to make a small step than it is a big step. And one of the reasons why it's easier is because your muscles fire stronger in that smaller area. When you start reaching outside of like it's your legs happy zone, like making those big steps, you don't have near the power. It drops off really quickly. So it allows you to put down a more powerful pedal stroke. Some people find that they can run the exact same chainring size with the shorter cranks because they're able to put their power down more efficiently.
Yeah. Well, I think too, a lot of riders are finding that they really benefit from shorter cranks, especially if they are not 6 feet tall like you. But it sounds like even tall riders can have an advantage to these shorter cranks. I mean, like on a trail bike, what would you choose to run, like as far as a crank length?
I run 165s on mine at 6 feet.
Okay. That's a little shorter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a little bit shorter than what traditionally, like 170, 175s are what you normally find on most trail bikes straight from OEM, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which, in my opinion, 170s they're not great for anybody that's, under 6 feet. Like that's just a huge handicap, honestly. I don't know why that hasn't changed already.
Yeah. Well, also, so then does that allow you to adjust the geometry of your bikes? Like, are you taking into account the shorter crank lengths and maybe going with like a lower bottom bracket? Is there an advantage to that, or are bottom brackets already kind of in a good place?
You can go lower on the bottom bracket design wise, but I haven't done that specifically just because some people, they still want to run those longer cranks. They have it in their head that they have to have that longer crank. They'll leverage is everything, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't want to tell anybody you have to run short cranks.
Yeah.
Even though there's so many advantages, it's really hard to argue.
Yeah. You're making a good case.
And studies, even in road biking, where short cranks are way more efficient and they can put down power way better. Even on the climbing stages, short cranks are better.
Interesting.
There's plenty of studies out there to squirrel on that respect.
You've got me convinced now too, because I mean, I'm 6'3", and I've never really felt the need or anything to even try anything shorter. The stock stuff tends to feel fine to me, but it sounds like there are a lot of advantages for everybody. So
at your height, really cool. You're really the exception to the rule.
Oh, so I shouldn't be on 165s?
No, I would try it.
Yeah,
I would. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to it.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I don't know if you know which cranks are on the test bike that I've got in, but I've got the Yelly Screamy in for test right now, hardtail. They came with some Canfield cranks. I guess I'll have to measure them and see which size they are.
They're written on the backside of the arm So
Okay.
right near the pedal, you can see what size they are, and they're easy to swap out. So we could send you a couple different sizes, and you can quite quickly just swap them out and try different crank lengths, and you can get your own feel for what length you like and where that tipping point is of like, okay, those are too short.
Yeah.
You know, but typically people only take a ride before they get past like, oh, this feels a little different. And then it's like, oh, this just feels normal.
Right.
And then when you switch back to a long crank, then the long cranks feel really awkward. That's usually how it goes.
I bet. Right. And I'm sure too, you start, having more pedal strikes and all that stuff. Like you just get used to like a certain setup, and it can be tough to go back.
Yeah. One of the biggest things about short cranks that we're finding is that it really benefits older riders. There's a huge segment of older riders that are ripping still, like, and they're fighting old age problems of achy everything, right?
Right.
Their knees and their hips and their ankles all hurt after a ride. Short cranks help with that so drastically.
Okay.
Yeah, we're finding that is a big reason why a lot of people are switching to shorter cranks.
Yeah.
Whether they're short or they're achy. Those are the two biggest reasons people really love our cranks and are switching over, besides the obvious of pedal strikes.
Yeah. Gotcha. Cool. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, as a smaller brand, how has Canfield been affected by the industry supply fluctuations over the past few years?
That's an interesting question. I think every bike company, every component company, everyone has been affected in one way or another. We saw this rise in people buying bikes in the beginning of COVID. The first year was like you couldn't keep anything in stock. You just sell things as fast as you could sell it. It was amazing. It was like the opposite of what I expected.
Right. The first couple of weeks we were like, oh, shoot, like nobody's going to buy anything and the world is doomed.
Yeah, those first couple of weeks were really scary. We had just purchased a property, a new warehouse. We had just moved the company. I had just invested every penny I had into production.
Oh, wow.
And then COVID hit, and I was quite nervous there for the first beginning of it. And those first couple of weeks, we had a lot of conversations on what are we going to do, and ultimately we just decided like, well, we're invested. Like either we succeed or we just like quit, and like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
Like, so we charged full steam ahead, and all of a sudden sales just started to flip the opposite direction of what we thought was going to happen. We were selling everything we could.
Yeah.
And then it got to a point where everybody was out of stock of everything. And we were just scrambling to try to find parts because we were kind of operating in a just in time type of ordering situation. It was like, oh, we can call Fox and just get a fork,
Right.
All of a sudden Fox didn't have forks.
Yeah.
And we couldn't find a 12-speed chain to save our lives. And wheels were like completely unavailable. So we started going all sorts of different directions. At one point we ordered custom Hadley hubs, and we had some Spank downhill rims. And so we had a local place in Colorado lace up downhill wheels for us so that we had wheels to be able to put on our downhill bikes to complete a build. At a certain point, we sold bikes that didn't have a drivetrain. It's like, it's a complete bike minus drivetrain. If you can find a drivetrain to put on your bike, buy it up.
Yeah, wow.
We went all sorts of different directions to be able to get the parts that we needed to continue to sell bikes. And lead times all of a sudden went crazy.
Yeah.
It wasn't a 3-month lead time anymore. It was if you were lucky if you had a 1-year lead time, and a lot of companies were giving us 2 years and even up to 3 years of lead time to be able to get product.
Wow.
And so everyone in the industry started ordering tons, like huge orders, because they were like, well, I've got a 2-year lead time. I need 2 years worth of product in this order.
Oh, right. And based on the current demand, which was like much higher than it had been previous years, right?
Yeah, much higher. And so, this high demand and then these long lead times led to over ordering.
Mm-hmm.
And then the demand all of a sudden just dropped.
Yeah.
One day. It was just like, hey, the demand's gone. Uh-oh.
It wasn't gradual at all for you. I mean, it was like almost just like a light switch got turned off.
It was kind of like that. Yeah. Within about a month, we saw like a big change. It was like, uh-oh, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then it just continued from there. And so people started to receive these orders, these large orders that they had placed.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the big companies, the big three, had massive orders in that were interfering with the little guys being able to place orders and get product in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
And the warehouses filled up, but the demand had dried up.
Right.
And so we're still seeing results of that, where these big companies still have massive amounts of inventory and they're still blowing out stuff where we made smart decisions on how much we ordered. We never really had too many things that were in overstock, like too much of anything. We had the right amount. We had the amount that we needed to sustain our company for the next year and grow and do what we needed to do. But these big companies had so much overstock that they discounted everything to the point where, the consumer at a certain point is just going to buy the cheap thing because it's so cheap. How can I not buy that? And then they have a new bike, and it may not be the best bike, but it's a new bike and they have it, and they're not going to buy a boutique bike at that point,
Right. Especially when you're comparing prices and, you're like, well, I can get this one a lot cheaper.
Mm-hmm. So we had us and pretty much every other company on the planet, no matter how big or small, they had to try to compete with those low prices.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone is on sale, like just bottom basement. And it's not like we were making great margins in the first place.
Right.
It's like we were making margins that allowed us to pay our staff well and, pay our bills and grow the company a little bit and plan for next year and have money in the bank to be able to pay for production because, small companies, we don't have credit with these manufacturers. We pay for the product up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, that's really difficult for us to compete in a marketplace when, they're just blowing out all this overstock. And it's not because we made a bad decision. It's because these gigantic corporations still have massive overstock and they're continuing to just blow it out at bargain.
Yeah. Do you have a sense for like how much they still have? Like how much longer do you think this is going to go on before we finally kind of clear everything out and stuff starts getting back to normal?
Well, Bicycle Retailer in their latest magazine had a graph on that, and there's still a decent amount of overstock, like pretty good amount. You can see it ever so slightly coming down.
Yeah.
And you can see the sales look like they're fairly flat, but the amount of inventory versus the amount of sales is still way off.
Wow.
We're hoping that through this next season, 2025, hopefully they'll work through that overstock of inventory and we'll get back to normal, hopefully for 2026, being optimistic. I hope that that's the case. I think it will be, but the time will tell. You can't really predict the future. You just make your best guesses and plan accordingly. And I think a lot of companies have just gone on just life support. It's like minimal staff, try to eliminate expenses wherever they can, do whatever they can to basically wait out the storm and wait until things get back to normal so that we can try to, start growing again. And that growth benefits the customer as much as it benefits us because we can develop new products. Like it's difficult to spend a lot of resources on developing things when there's not a lot of spare resources.
Right. You definitely have to be an optimist, it sounds like, in the bike industry. And at times that gets the industry into trouble when you're overly optimistic. But yeah, it's good to hear that there is still that hope and that, it's going to get better, and we're always looking forward to the next thing. So speaking of the next thing,
we're not going anywhere.
Yeah. What's next for Canfield then? What mountain bike developments or trends or future products? What's got you excited right now?
Well, the thing that has me the most excited is that our customers and people just voted the Tilt.
That's right.
All Mountain Bike of the Year.
Yeah.
That definitely stokes the fire under me.
Yeah. And a lot of people are probably surprised, right? Again, because Canfield's like a smaller brand. And I would have been surprised and would have been kind of skeptical, like, I don't know if that's right. Maybe, something was going on with the voting. But I can say that like our previous features editor, Matt Miller, tested the Tilt, I believe, and maybe another Canfield bike. And then another of our contributors, Chris Schaefer, tested one. And both of them they love the Canfield Tilt. They love CBF suspension. And so, yeah. That's I think it's a recognition of that this is actually different, and it's something that a lot of people maybe should take a look at.
Yeah, those guys did love the bike. We were super grateful that they wrote such raving review about it in their reviews. Matt ended up actually buying a lithium.
That's right. Yeah.
Afterwards, he liked the Tilt enough to actually buy his personal bike from us.
Yeah.
So that was I love it when I hear stories like that, just like, you really did like it. I'm so happy I did my job right.
Yeah. That's cool. And so, what about future products, or are there trends or things that you're seeing in the industry that have you excited about coming up with new stuff?
The trend of changing standards does not ever have me thrilled. So I'm excited that we have some pretty good standards that are already on the board, and hopefully things are kind of settling out to where we
no more
use those standards and then, develop new bikes. And I'm excited about hopefully not having standards come out from left field like we've seen in the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that'll change? Like, do you think that these component companies and different people, have they gotten the message, or do they not care and it's just what they do?
I think there's a lot of good standards on the table right now. And there's there's still multiple standards in many ways, chain line spacing and wheel hub standards. But head tubes are mostly 4456. So it makes it a lot easier for us to just do 4456 on all of our bikes. And that way we have one headset that fits everything.
Yeah.
It's easier from an inventory standpoint and sales standpoint on our side. I like boost spacing. It works quite well. And the chainring offsets to accommodate Super Boost. And, I think Super Boost Plus was like, it's 1.5 millimeters difference. Like, really?
Yeah.
I mean, okay. That one doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. But Super Boost is reasonable because it does give you a wider spoke flange spacing, a tougher wheel, considerably tougher. Just read or watched a YouTube video on how much stronger a 157 wheel is. And I was quite shocked at how much stronger it was.
Yeah.
Surprised. Excited about that, potentially exploring that a little bit more. As far as products that we're doing, we have a titanium version of the Nimble 9 coming out.
Okay. So
a tried and true geometry that is awesome, really fun bike, and shaves about 1.5 pounds off of our steel bike, which is pretty considerable. Wow. We have a lot of customers that are on Nimble 9s as their everyday bike, and they absolutely love them. So I'm excited to release the titanium bike. It's gorgeous. I've got some samples and I've been riding it down here in Sedona and doing photos, and it's everything that we had hoped for. The Tilt and Lithium have been in their cycle for about 4 years now, which is a little bit long, but that is part of the COVID problems is why it's continued for the 4 years. However, we do have new stuff coming on that front. Some new design changes and some things I think that a lot of people are going to be really excited about. A couple of great features that are big improvements on adjustability. from what it was. I've always been a designer that designs things fairly simply in the regard that I don't want to give people a lot of adjustments that allow them to make an adjustment that will allow them to make it feel bad. Right?
Okay. Yeah. Limited adjustments. Only the pre-approved ones. Yeah.
Yes. And so I've given a few pre-approved adjustments to the new bike. Of course, everyone's on UDH these days, so that had to happen. So a few things like that, but that will be launched here about a month or so from now. We'll be launching that. So you'll be able to see all the details on that. And I think those changes, in addition to Bike of the Year thing, I think that hopefully that will point a lot of people to us and help us survive through this next year and get, even more things out on the market.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, we're excited to see what you come up with next. You've had such a long career in the bike industry and, starting out as a racer and, designing bikes and building this brand. And so, yeah, it's been really great to talk to you, hear your story. And we can't wait to see what's next.
I appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you so much. And yeah, just real quickly, I'd like to thank all of our customers and the people that are listening to this podcast and just Canfield curious and, like you, Jeff, like short crank curious and trying to see all of these, like, hopefully you're seeing the things that we've done in the past and the innovations that we have stimulated, whether it's 29ers that were actually fun to ride, 2013, the first hardtails on the market that were fun and awesome to ride. They didn't drive like a bus, thin pedals, short cranks, CBF suspension, focusing things in so that the rider experience is better and more intuitive and just gives you an advantage that you can be proud of. To see that head tube badge with a skull.
Yeah, right on. Well, you can find out more about some of the bikes and products we talked about at CanfieldBikes.com. We'll have that link for you in the show notes. That's all we've got this time. We'll talk to you again next time.